When you look at society more broadly, what is one thing that we're not talking about enough that we should be talking about more?
I think that in recent months, I have come to think, and you can tell me if I'm misusing this concept, that projection really does form a large part of the problems that we're having when we're seeing these arguments that are going on between people, and they will say there will be accusations of hypocrisy, and people will be saying, well, you are trying to do this.
I see a lot like, I'll say something like, I think everyone should receive the same type of fair treatment and good care and therapy, even if they're a Trump supporter. And someone will yell back, like, why are you defending hatred? Oh, and that seems kind of like a projection.
Yes, I think at the moment we are seeing an awful lot of these fallacies, and we're seeing an assumption, and I'll try and start again. There is an assumption that other people will be operating in the same way that you are. Somebody will say something like, "Well, would you say that if it was the other way round about men or about women or black people or white people? Or imagine if this was the other way round." And if you're coming from a consistently principled standpoint, then it is. That is how you're thinking about it. So I think sometimes we need to look at how people are arguing, and when they are arguing for inconsistency and for hypocrisy, they are quite typically taking a very tribalistic view themselves, and they are assuming that nobody else holds consistent principles either.
So I tried to get this discourse started the other day. It posted reasonably well. But I think that a big issue that a lot of people aren't aware of, and most of the people who are aware of it are, kind of fringe ideologues. Maybe I fit that description too. Is a Supreme Court case called Griggs v. Duke Power, right? And this massively extended the implications of the Civil Rights Act, right? So as written, the Civil Rights Act only applies to overt discrimination, right? And that like an employer is not allowed to have an employment policy of whites only, Koreans only or anything like that, right? And if you can prove that they have such a policy either formally or informally, then that you have a case against them, right? Griggs v. Duke Power extended this in a way that's completely untenable in that it said that even policies that are facially neutral are subject to scrutiny if they produce a racially disproportionate outcome, right? And so the original case was it was a power company, right? So fairly technical work, right? That gave essentially, an IQ test to applicants, and then they had some pretty low cutoff, it's like 85 or something, right? And they're just like, look, this is just a basic screening thing. You have to be at least this sort of awake and aware to work in a power plant that matters to a lot of people. It matters if this keeps going. But of course, because the statistical distributions of intelligence are not identical between the races, any such policy like this is going to result in a disproportionate outcome, right? It's not going to result in no black people hired, but it's going to be less than the 13% or whatever of the population that they are. And this court case essentially held that it didn't outright ban anything that has a disparate impact, but it meant that it's subject to so much scrutiny that a lot of people avoid this, right? And this has a lot of negative downstream consequences. Not just important work being done less well than it could, but the fact that companies now have to rely on proxies for intelligence, right? Because they can't directly measure it. And I think this is at least in part driven a lot of the sort of credential inflation that we see is because they can't directly test for these things, so they have to use things that are proxies for it, right? Like degrees, right? I think there are a lot of jobs that people could easily do with like 6 weeks of training and don't need a degree for it, but the degree is a great filter for intelligence and conscientiousness, right? And so people are sinking, $100,000 into a degree that they, at least economically, probably don't need in order to sort of arbitrage their way around, Griggs v. Duke Power. So yeah, if I have to plug one thing, it's that I think that we need to, and then the decision was then codified in the 1990 Civil Rights Act. I think if I could pitch one thing, it's that we need to sort of scrub all this stuff away and return to the original, 1964, 1965 version of the Civil Rights Act, which just said deals with overt discrimination. And we need to accept the fact that not everything is going to be perfectly proportionate all the time, right? Just, like nothing's going to be, in fact, right? And it's going to be disproportionate in different ways, right? The music industry is disproportionately dominated by, minorities, right? Like blacks and Hispanics are overrepresented in the music industry, right? Physics departments are probably going to be disproportionately like East Asian and Ashkenazi Jewish, right? And that just needs to be okay, right? Overt discrimination is bad. We can agree on that. That's a great sort of shelling point for society. So yeah, that's my pitch.
That is very interesting. Have you read Richard Hanania's Origins of Woke?
No, I follow, I see a lot of his content. I think I'm generally aware of his perspective, but I didn't read that. Yeah. I
Yeah,
know he has like a sort of similar perspective that civil rights law is at the root of a lot of this. Yeah.
it's really interesting to me because in a lot of my writing, I focus a lot on the theoretical philosophy side, breaking down postmodernism, critical theory. And that perspective is like, it's not so much this high level concepts, it's encoded into the law, you know? And rather than arguing philosophically, we just need to change some legal stuff. And I think that's a very interesting perspective. I like that.
Yeah, I think that both are important, right? I'm also kind of a philosophy nerd, right? I'm very much a head in the clouds, theorist type of person, right? Even when I was a physics major, I mostly took like theoretical rather than applied classes. And so, I do think it matters if we want to get the laws changed, right? Then we have to also deal with the beliefs that led people to institute those laws, right? So I really think both matter. It's just different, sort of levels of magnification or, different angles, but I think, a sort of full stack approach is necessary, right? We have to address the reason why people thought these things were a good idea in the first place, then get rid of them, right? The cash value of the philosophical change is the legal change.
Yeah.
I think as far as culturally significant issues, I feel like surrogacy is one that is not on the radar. A lot of people that seems like they should care. I mean, I think it's a big problem. I mean, maybe not in Ukraine now, but you had a lot of people, at least before the war, that were in contracts with women in Ukraine and a few other countries to have children for them. And I think that separating the birth of children from the physical relationship of the parents and making a commercial transaction out of it, I think that's, if that were done at scale, if that were actually done at scale, that would have a lot of negative social, it would create a lot of social pathologies. Right now, it's not being done at a large enough scale where that's obvious. I think that would become obvious. And I think that's something where it would be better if we did not learn that from experience. If we just, maybe it would be more politically tenable if we said, okay, it's legal. I think Denmark did this. Where he said it's legal, but you can't have a commercial contract about it. So if somebody's cousin or something wants to have their baby because their cousin can't have a baby, I don't think that's a good idea, honestly, but that might be more politically attainable because if you just said this isn't something we're commercializing, then people would have the free choice if they can talk somebody into doing it for non-commercial reasons. But yeah, I think that's I think in general, the way people bond with parents is something that's not. It's only talked about to vilify parents. It's not talked about to build good, positive social policy that encourages healthy family relationships. There's other things related to that, like hopefully we will talk about how maybe some of our welfare programs right now are incentivizing lower class people to not get married because there's certain financial incentives they can get access to. And there's a host of things related to that that either elite people support, like because they're having kids real late, and then surrogacy is something they turn to have kids without impacting their careers or because they're past a certain age, or elite people don't even think about. We're incentivizing people to live in situations where things are just vague and the kids are being brought up where their parents aren't married. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things like that people have discussed but are not being discussed in the legislature.
Okay, so I think we are not talking about the conversation of mental health more. And I think they make the conversation of mental health like diversity. That's not what this conversation is. It's our lifeline. It is our peace. It is our joy. And they make it seem like it's like a thing, another like government thing, and it's not a thing. And I think the conversation of mental health has to change, like even just shifting, because it's not, they make it really, if you look at it, it's something that like Democrats support. Oh, let's get support for these mental health programs. And Republicans are like, well, why are we going to support that? So it ends up being like this Democrat thing. It's not, to me, it's not a bipartisan issue. And I think that more people and even the way that they're talking about it, it's like, well, I go to therapy or I do this. It's not about identity, like who I am. I feel like it needs to be a conversation of like the details within the mental health, not just therapy. I went to therapy or I, got help for my mental health. Like it needs to be broken down to like confidence, identity, worth, like the specifics of why we actually need to talk about this.
Can I come at it from the angle
Yeah.
of how we're educating people at
Hmm.
large?
Yeah.
So, when you ask that question, what I immediately think of is, all right, in this supposed age of enlightenment and information, what are we teaching people, right? And so, what I think about is, like, we should be teaching people how to have good critical thinking skills from an early, like when I say kindergarten, I mean it. Like, we should be teaching people how to have good critical thinking skills. We should be teaching people how to actually learn. We should be teaching people the actual scientific method. We should be teaching people how to, and this is at all ages, we should be teaching people how to communicate well with other people. At this stage of everything, we do have decent behavioral information. Like, we should be teaching people more psychology. The problem with this is, like, if you, like, I could go say this to a bunch of educators and psychs, and they may go down some completely different roads than I would go down. Like, I don't have an agenda. My agenda is truth and reality. That's my agenda. And I think that's a lot of what we should be pushing. I mean, it's hard to encapsulate it all. Like, there's so much there.
I like this
But
idea of teaching people how to think rather than what to think. Like, you give them tools of critical thinking skills and let them come to their own conclusions.
yeah, like, we homeschool our 3 children, and like our homeschooling ethos largely revolves around, do you know how to think? Do you know what the actual scientific method is? Do you know how to get information, where to get it, how to learn, how to disseminate, how to parse information, how to run, like, when they get old enough, like, hey, how do you look at a data table, and how do you look at, like, all these things? Like, a healthy dose of skepticism we teach. Now, funnily enough, my oldest is 18. Funnily enough, that kid's got some different views than we have. Just nothing like necessarily super weird or anything, but she has some particular views on things, some of which we didn't teach her. But I don't have an issue with that because, again, one thing she's very bullish about is what we did teach her, which is, do you know how to think? Do you know how to, like, you're allowed to form your own opinion, and then I think also, like, how to deal with people that have differing opinions.
I was homeschooled from kindergarten through 9th grade, and I would say I'm very grateful for A, the critical thinking skills, and B, the love of learning. I feel like I see so many people who come through school and are just like learning is not fun. It's boring. It's, kind of burnout on it. And to me, like, learning's always been exciting, and I'm grateful that was implanted in me.
Yeah, that's definitely another thing that we, like, push here is, like, this is fun.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what my wife and I live too, is like, you can call it being a geek or whatever, but, like, to me, everything's interesting.
Yeah.
Nearly everything is interesting. Like,
Good way to go through life, I think.
yeah, I mean, I think, it's going to sound really geeky, but I think when you get kind of hooked into a deep dive of how the cement cooling stacks at power plants are made, like, what you think, was there anything special there? Like, it's fascinating to me, like, but everything's
Yeah.
fascinating to me. Like, I could get distracted with, like, and I don't have much here in my office, but, like, I could get really distracted with just like, my brain's just pew, 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 like,
Yeah.
but that's what that's also a lot of what we teach our kids too, is like you say, a love for learning.